I never thought exposing the truth would turn me into the villain, but that's exactly what happened. I walked into work one morning thinking I was about to be the hero, the guy who finally stood up to the boss who had been robbing the company blind. Instead, I ended up being the one everyone hated. I've worked at this place for almost 8 years. It's not glamorous, just a mid-sized logistics company, the kind of place where people clock in, move numbers and boxes around, and clock out. But for me, it was stability. I had bills, kids, and not a lot of options, so I stuck with it. My boss, though? He was a different story. The guy had the kind of smug, untouchable attitude that made your blood boil. The Rolex on his wrist was worth more than my car, and he'd brag about vacations to Europe while half of us struggled to pay rent. At first, I thought he was just another overpaid manager. But then I started noticing things. Missing inventory. Numbers in the system that didn't add up. Orders marked as fulfilled that I knew damn well had never left the warehouse. I brought it up casually once in a meeting and he brushed it off with a fake laugh, saying, "That's why you leave the accounting to me." Everyone laughed with him. I didn't. I kept my mouth shut, but I kept my eyes open. And what I found was worse than I imagined. He wasn't just skimming, he was bleeding the company dry. Fake vendors, fake invoices, ghost shipments that existed only on paper. He was funneling thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, straight into accounts with names that didn't exist. I knew if I went straight to him, he'd bury me. So I did what I thought was right, I gathered proof. I copied files, saved emails, even took photos of forged signatures. It took weeks of careful digging, but eventually I had a folder so damning it felt like I was holding dynamite. I didn't sleep that night, imagining how it would go down. I'd walk into HR, drop the truth on the table, and my boss would finally get what he deserved. People would clap me on the back, call me brave. Maybe they'd even promote me for being the one guy with the guts to stand up to him. But reality doesn't work like that. Reality doesn't reward heroes, it chews them up. When I finally sat down with HR and laid it all out, their eyes went wide. They nodded, whispered to each other, told me I did the right thing. I left the office shaking with adrenaline, certain his days were numbered. The next morning, he was still there. Smiling. Smug as ever. And everyone was staring at me like I had just kicked a puppy. That's when I realized, he knew. He knew everything. And somehow, he had already spun the story against me. The second I walked in that morning, I knew something was off. Conversations hushed when I passed. People who usually nodded or joked with me kept their heads down, pretending to type, pretending not to notice. My boss was leaning against the front desk, laughing with HR like nothing had happened, like the folder full of evidence I'd dropped on their desk the day before didn't exist. When his eyes met mine, he smiled. Not a friendly smile. The smile of a man who had already won. By lunchtime, the rumors had started. Whispers that I was bitter. That I had been caught messing up shipments and was trying to cover my own tracks by blaming him. HR called me into a follow-up meeting where the questions were suddenly sharp, accusatory. Why were you digging into files outside your department? Why did you feel the need to copy documents without authorization? My lawyer brain, which I don't have, screamed at me that I was being set up. I tried to explain, to remind them that the only reason I had those files was because I was trying to protect the company, but their eyes were already cold. They weren't listening. They were protecting him. By the end of the week, the entire office had turned. My lunches were eaten alone. My coworkers whispered when I walked past. The same people who used to come to me for help with schedules and numbers now looked at me like I was radioactive. And the boss? He played it perfectly. He would stroll by my desk, clap me on the shoulder, and say things like, "We all make mistakes, buddy," loud enough for everyone to hear. To them, it sounded like mercy. To me, it was a knife in the ribs. I started noticing small things too: my access to certain files revoked, my login flagged, assignments reassigned. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and I couldn't do anything about it without looking paranoid. At home, I was falling apart. My wife asked why I was so quiet, why I looked like a ghost. I wanted to tell her everything, but how do you explain to someone that the truth doesn't matter when power is involved? That the more evidence you have, the more dangerous you become to the people who are supposed to protect you? The final blow came when my best friend at the company, the guy I'd eaten lunch with for years, pulled me aside. He looked nervous, eyes darting around. "Look," he said quietly, "people are saying you tried to frame him. That you're just jealous. If I were you, I'd stop pushing this. You're not going to win. My stomach dropped. You believe that? I asked. He wouldn't look me in the eye. I don't know what to believe. But everyone else already chose a side. That's when it hit me, I hadn't exposed my boss. He had exposed me. And now, I was the rat. The isolation was worse than the whispers. Whispers you can ignore, but silence from people you thought were your friends cuts deeper than any knife. Weeks passed and I was basically a ghost in my own office. Projects I had built from scratch were reassigned. My name disappeared from team emails. I wasn't invited to meetings anymore, except the ones where HR grilled me like I was already guilty of something. And through it all, my boss strutted around like a king. His Rolex flashing, his laugh echoing down the halls, his handshakes lingering with the higher-ups who had the power to stop him but didn't. I realized the truth, the company didn't want a scandal. They didn't want headlines about fraud and theft. They wanted quiet. And the easiest way to get quiet was to make me the problem. But I'm stubborn. Maybe too stubborn. Instead of shutting up like everyone wanted, I started documenting everything. Every shady email. Every suspicious transfer. Every shipment that vanished on paper but not in reality. I built a second folder, bigger than the first, and this time I didn't take it to HR. I didn't trust them. I decided to go higher outside the company. Whistleblower lines. Regulatory boards. Even a contact I knew at the local paper. I told myself this wasn't just about me anymore. This was about justice. About not letting people like him win. But deep down, if I'm honest, it was personal. I wanted to burn his empire to the ground. I wanted him to feel as humiliated as I did, sitting alone in the break room while everyone whispered behind my back. The first sign that he knew I was still digging came on a Tuesday morning. I logged in and found my account suspended. No warning. No explanation. Just locked out. A security guard walked me out like I was a criminal, my coworkers watching from their desks with wide eyes and smirks they tried to hide. HR called it a temporary investigation. I called it what it was, retaliation. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, the new folder open on my laptop, my wife pacing the room. You can't fight him, she said, her voice tight with fear. He has money, lawyers, connections. You'll lose. I shook my head, tears burning my eyes. I've already lost. If I stop now, then he wins completely. At least this way I go down swinging. She didn't answer. She just looked at me like she didn't recognize the man she married. And maybe she didn't. Maybe I didn't either. Because I wasn't just an employee anymore. I was a whistleblower. And I was about to find out exactly how dangerous that could be. The first email I sent outside the company felt like crossing a line I couldn't uncross. I attached everything, spreadsheets, screenshots, scanned invoices with forged signatures, even audio I had secretly recorded of him bragging on a phone call. My heart hammered as I hit send to the regulatory board, then another copy to the journalist I knew. For a few hours, I felt powerful again, like I had struck back. But paranoia set in quickly. Every car that slowed outside my house made me tense. Every unknown number on my phone felt like a threat. And then the retaliation started for real. My wife got a call from her job, someone had filed a complaint about her, ridiculous stuff like unprofessional behavior and lateness. She'd never been late in her life. A coincidence? I knew better. A few days later, my kids came home from school saying someone had been asking them questions, a family friend they'd never seen before. My blood ran cold. He wasn't just going after me, he was sending a message, stop, or your family pays. The breaking point came when the journalist finally called me back. Her voice was low, cautious. Look, I believe you. This story is huge. But your company is powerful. They have lawyers on retainer who eat cases like this for breakfast. If you go public, you won't just lose your job. You could lose everything. Are you ready for that? I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, staring at my daughters doing homework at the table. Was I ready to risk their safety, their stability, for justice? Or was I already too deep to turn back? Before I could answer, the company made their move. A letter arrived by certified mail, termination of employment, effective immediately. Reason: violation of company policy, misconduct, and breach of confidentiality. In other words, I was fired for exposing the truth. My hand shook as I read it aloud to my wife. She covered her mouth, tears in her eyes. "What are we going to do?" she whispered. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that my boss wasn't satisfied with just firing me. He wanted me destroyed. And as I sat there with the termination letter in one hand and my evidence folder in the other, I realized this wasn't just about saving my job anymore. It was about survival. And the only question left was, how far was I willing to go to make sure he didn't win? The day the article dropped, my phone nearly melted. I had gone back and forth for weeks, debating whether to give the journalist the green light. My wife begged me not to, terrified of what would happen. But in the end, I couldn't live with silence. So I gave her everything: emails, invoices, recordings. She promised anonymity, but anonymity doesn't exist when you're the only one who could have had that kind of access. The headline hit like a bomb: local logistics firm under investigation for fraud, millions missing. My boss's smiling face, pulled from a company press release, was plastered across the page. The story spread like wildfire. Online news sites, social media, even the local TV station picked it up. And within hours, my phone started buzzing nonstop. Old coworkers texted me things like, "Did you really do it?" or "You're insane, man." Some congratulated me in private, but publicly? Silence. No one wanted to be associated with me. At first, I felt vindicated. Finally, people knew. Finally, the truth was out there where he couldn't twist it. But the high didn't last long. By the next day, I saw his counterattack. A glossy PR statement appeared on the company's website, painting him as a victim of a disgruntled ex-employee who had fabricated documents out of spite after being terminated. They didn't mention my name, but they didn't have to. Everyone knew. Online trolls started flooding my social media with insults, calling me a liar, a failure, accusing me of trying to ruin hard-working people's jobs. My wife's car was keyed in the grocery store parking lot. My kids overheard classmates calling me a snitch. The walls closed in fast. But then, something unexpected happened. A man I'd never met before reached out to me through an encrypted email. He said he used to work for the company 2 years ago, and that he had seen the same fraud back then but had been too scared to speak up. He told me I wasn't alone, that there were others. My heart pounded as I read his message over and over. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. Maybe I wasn't crazy. Maybe I wasn't just one man screaming into the void. Maybe I had allies. But hope is dangerous, and I should have known better. Because just when I thought the tide might finally turn, I found out that exposing him had only opened the first door. There were bigger secrets buried in that company, secrets that made my boss's theft look like pocket change. And now, I was standing right in the middle of it. The encrypted email rattled in my brain all night. I barely slept, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should respond or just delete it and pretend it never existed. By morning, paranoia had taken root so deep I unplugged the Wi-Fi before opening my laptop again. But curiosity beat fear. I replied. We set up a call using an app I'd never heard of, and when his voice finally came through, low and distorted, it sent chills down my spine. He called himself Mark. Said he'd been in middle management years before me, working directly under the same boss. He lasted 3 years before he quit, but not before seeing things he couldn't unsee. You think it's just fraud, he said. You're scratching the surface. The company isn't just skimming money. They're laundering it. My mouth went dry. Laundering. He explained how ghost shipments weren't just about padding pockets, they were about moving money for people outside the company, dangerous people. Shell companies, fake suppliers, overseas accounts. My boss wasn't just greedy, he was a middleman in something much bigger. And by exposing him, I hadn't just embarrassed a corrupt manager, I'd pissed off whoever was paying him. Mark warned me, these aren't people you can fight in court. They don't care about lawsuits. They care about silence. You're in danger. I wanted to call him paranoid, but deep down I knew he was right. The strange cars idling near my house. The man my kids said had been asking them questions. My wife's job suddenly under attack. It wasn't random. It was pressure. A message to shut up. I told Mark I needed proof. If I was going to keep pushing, I had to know exactly what I was up against. He hesitated, then promised to send me files he'd saved before leaving the company. But once you see them, he said, you'll never sleep again. When the files arrived, I felt sick. Bank transfers with amounts so huge they didn't look real. Wire instructions to accounts in places I'd only heard about on the news. Names of companies that didn't exist anywhere except on paper. And one signature I recognized instantly, my boss's. My hands trembled as I scrolled. This wasn't corporate fraud. This was organized crime. I sat there at my kitchen table, kids asleep upstairs, my wife dozing on the couch, and felt the weight of something I had no business carrying. I wasn't a cop. I wasn't an investigator. I was just a guy who moved numbers around in a warehouse. But now I had proof of something people would kill to protect. And as I closed the laptop, I realized the scariest part: if Mark had been too scared to come forward years ago, why was he reaching out now? What did he want from me? After seeing those files, I couldn't eat, couldn't breathe right. Every sound outside the house made me jump. The slam of a car door, the creak of the mailbox, it all felt like signals that someone was watching. And deep down, I knew they were. I started noticing the same black SUV parked across the street at odd hours. My wife thought I was being paranoid until one night I walked outside suddenly and the engine roared to life, speeding away without headlights. That was the moment she stopped arguing. She sat me down at the kitchen table, tears in her eyes, and said, "I don't care about your company or your boss. But our kids, they didn't choose this. If you keep going, you're not just fighting them, you're dragging us all into it." Her words hit harder than anything my boss had thrown at me. She was right. My kids were innocent. And if these people really were laundering money for dangerous groups, then what was one broke ex-employee to them? A problem. A liability. A message. I called Mark that night, my voice low, hands shaking. "Why did you come to me?" I demanded. He was silent for a long time before answering. "Because I couldn't do it alone. And you already lit the match. They're coming after you anyway. The only chance you have is to finish it before they bury you." His words chilled me to the bone. Finish it. Like this was some kind of war and I was already drafted. The next morning, I found an envelope on my porch. No stamp, no address. Just my name scrawled across the front. Inside was a single photo, me walking my daughters into school. No note. No threat. Just the picture. My hands shook so violently I dropped it on the floor. They wanted me to know they could reach us anytime, anywhere. That day, my wife packed bags. She begged me to leave town, to disappear, to let it all go. And for the first time, I almost said yes. I almost chose safety over justice. But then I looked at my daughters, asleep in the back seat of the car as we debated leaving, and something inside me snapped. If I ran, I'd be running forever. If I stayed silent, I'd always be looking over my shoulder. The only way to protect them wasn't to hide, it was to make sure the people threatening us couldn't anymore. That night, I opened the laptop again. My decision was made. I wasn't going to HR, I wasn't going to my boss. I was going to the feds. Contacting the feds felt like stepping off a cliff. I didn't even know the right number to call, so I spent half the night on burner forums until I finally found a whistleblower hotline that wasn't just a corporate joke. My voice cracked when I explained who I was and what I had, half expecting them to laugh me off. But they didn't. 2 days later, 2 men in plain suits showed up at my door, flashing badges so quickly I almost doubted they were real. They sat in my living room, my wife glaring at me from the kitchen, and listened as I laid out everything: emails, invoices, the files Mark had given me. They didn't interrupt. They didn't nod or frown. They just scribbled in notebooks while I poured out the story that had been eating me alive for months. When I finished, one of them leaned back and said the words I'd been both dreading and hoping for: "You understand this is bigger than just your boss, right?" My stomach dropped. How big? He didn't answer. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes said it all. They promised to look into it, told me not to tell anyone else, and left. For a brief second, I felt lighter, like I had passed the burden to someone who could actually handle it. But then the retaliation came harder. That night, a brick smashed through our living room window with a note wrapped around it: "Stop talking." My wife screamed, clutching the kids while I stood there barefoot in the glass, rage and fear twisting inside me. I called the agents, left frantic voicemails, but no one picked up. Days turned into a blur of paranoia. The SUV outside wasn't even trying to hide anymore. Neighbors started asking questions about why men in suits were visiting. At school, my daughters whispered about how their friends' parents didn't want them coming over anymore. The humiliation was suffocating. I wasn't just losing my job, I was becoming a pariah. Then Mark called again, his voice urgent. They know you went to the feds. You don't have much time. You need to decide if you're in this fight all the way or not. I wanted to scream at him, ask why he dragged me into this mess, but deep down I knew the truth, I had dragged myself. The moment I opened that first file, the moment I refused to stay silent, I had chosen this path. And now there was no way back. Weeks crawled by with no word from the agents. No follow-up calls, no updates, nothing. Every time the phone rang I jumped, hoping it was them, but it was always spam or silence. Meanwhile, the pressure around me grew unbearable. My wife barely spoke to me anymore except to say things like, "We should have left or you're going to get us killed." My daughters looked at me like I was the reason their lives were falling apart, and maybe I was. The SUV outside was replaced by different cars every few days, but they all carried the same message: "We see you." One morning, I walked out to find our mailbox ripped out of the ground and tossed into the street. Another night, we came home to find our door cracked open, nothing stolen but everything slightly moved, as if someone had walked through our lives just to remind us they could. I called the agents again, desperate, and finally one answered. His voice was curt, tired. "These things take time. You need to keep quiet and stay patient." Patient? I was watching my family unravel, my wife packing bags she never unpacked, my kids flinching at every shadow. Patience wasn't an option. That night, Mark called me again. He sounded different this time, angry, reckless. "They're stalling. They're not going to take him down. He's protected. If you want this to end, you have to end it yourself." My blood ran cold. "What do you mean, end it?" He didn't answer directly. Just said, "There's a file hidden in the system. It links your boss directly to offshore accounts. You get that out in the open, he burns. But you'll have to go back inside to get it." My heart pounded. Going back inside the company after everything? After being fired, after being watched? It was suicide. But the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. The feds were too slow, too compromised, maybe even too scared. If I wanted to protect my family, if I wanted this nightmare to stop, I had to be the one to finish it. For hours I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the broken window we still hadn't fixed, listening to my wife cry quietly upstairs. I thought about walking away, about disappearing into another town with a new name. But then I thought about my boss's smirk, about the photo of my daughters taken by strangers, about the brick through our window. And I knew there was no walking away. The only way out was through. I picked up the phone, called Mark, and said the words that sealed my fate: "Tell me where the file is." The night I went back felt like walking into my own grave. Mark had given me instructions so detailed they made my skin crawl: door codes, shift schedules, even which cameras mysteriously malfunctioned at certain times. He knew too much, but I didn't have the luxury of doubt anymore. My wife begged me not to go. She stood in the doorway with tears running down her face, whispering, "If you do this, you're not coming back the same." Maybe she was right. But I kissed her on the forehead, hugged my kids while they slept, and walked out into the dark. Getting in was easier than I expected. The badge I'd stolen from my own desk before being fired still worked, which meant either security was lazy or someone wanted me inside. The warehouse loomed around me, silent except for the hum of machines. Every shadow looked alive, every sound like a warning. My hands shook as I logged into a terminal deep in the accounting office, typing the credentials Mark had given me. And there it was, the file. Layers of transactions stacked like bricks in a wall, millions funneled through fake companies into offshore accounts. Names that matched headlines about crime syndicates, organizations I'd only heard about in the news. And at the center of it all, my boss's signature, page after page, undeniable. My pulse thundered in my ears as I copied everything onto a drive. That's when the lights flicked on. He was standing in the doorway. My boss. Calm. Smiling. A gun dangling loosely in his hand. "You just couldn't let it go, could you?" he said, his voice almost gentle. "All you had to do was walk away." My mouth went dry. "They'll know," I stammered, clutching the drive in my pocket. "The feds, the press, once this is out, you're done." He laughed, shaking his head. "You think this is about me? I'm a piece on the board. You burn me, they replace me. You burn the company, they rebuild it. But you? You're fragile. One little accident, and you vanish." He stepped closer, the barrel of the gun glinting under the fluorescent lights. My knees threatened to buckle, but then I thought of the photo of my daughters, of my wife shaking hands as she packed bags, of every humiliation, every threat, every night staring into the dark. I wasn't leaving without that file. Before he could raise the gun, the fire alarm shrieked. Sprinklers erupted, drenching us both. Mark burst into the room, wild-eyed, wielding a crowbar like a madman. "Run," he shouted. Chaos exploded. The gun went off, deafening in the small office. I dove under the desk, clutching the drive like it was life itself. By the time I scrambled to my feet, Mark had my boss pinned against the wall, blood on both their faces. I didn't wait. I ran. Out of the office, out of the building, into the night. I don't even remember driving home. Just the rain pounding the windshield, the flash of police lights as I called in the tip, the trembling in my hands as I handed over the drive to the agents who finally came. Weeks later, headlines told the story: Logistics CEO arrested in federal raid. Photos of my boss in cuffs plastered across every screen. They called it one of the biggest corporate laundering busts in years. They called the whistleblower anonymous. But I knew the truth. It wasn't victory. Not really. My wife still flinches at every noise. My daughters still look at me with questions I can't answer. Mark vanished after that night, no calls, no emails, nothing. Sometimes I wonder if he was real at all, or just another ghost in the machine. But when I close my eyes, I see my boss's smirk fade as the sirens closed in, and I know this: I may have lost everything, but I took him down. And for the first time in months, I finally slept.